All right, eighth graders, here we go. We're taking the big leap forward as we read Trevor Noah, Born a Crime. Technically, what you're getting is a different version of a very, very popular book. This right here, Trevor Noah, Born a Crime. This was the original book. It went pretty solid, and you guys should know this. This is the version we're reading, which is a little different. He is sort of an adult-oriented comedian, so some of his language is a little on the harsh side. But the concepts are still the same. The book's story is essentially the same, just some words have been shifted so that they're a little bit more school friendly. Okay, so here's the thing. I'm going to walk you through the very first steps, and this is going to be the new pattern. So I'm going to try to be quick, but also pay attention because this is how we want things to go throughout, and we're not going to do this every time. I'm going to read chapter 1 today, and essentially we're always going to there's 3 parts to the book, and we're going to start with each part has sort of an essential question that you're always going to be thinking about. And what we want to focus on, the first part of the book, is one essential question of how does apartheid affect Trevor Noah's life? Because he's going to do a lot of explaining of that in every chapter. And there's about 8 chapters in part 1. So you've already hopefully got your Cornell notes started in terms of the work we did on Thursday and Friday. So this should be review. Your Cornell notes for today will be just like they were before. And I want you to actually label in a notebook, right? Take a new page, title it Chapter 1 Notes, and your notes will be Cornell notes, where on the left you start with the question, and you're always going to have at least 2 vocabulary words. And there's a lot of them, but I just picked 2 real quick ones right away so that no one's lost. The word indigenous is a really important word in this book. So indigenous happens in the first page 5, in fact. We got to know what that word means. Some of you don't, some of you do, okay? Jubilant is also a word that's used on page 5, and we have to know what that means in order to understand what he's saying, okay? So every single chapter, we want you to have these vocab words, but paraphrase what their meaning is. If you just copy down the dictionary definition, you're going to get something you probably don't even know. Dictionary is not great at helping people understand. Dictionaries are great at helping people start to understand. The rest of the work has to be done by you. So the first 2 notes for every chapter are going to most likely be your vocabulary. After that, what we want you looking for is, again, the essential question right there. How does apartheid affect Trevor Noah's life? This will be the same question for a while. So whatever you write down here is going to be a direct quote. So you're going to kind of do 2 different things, right? First thing you do is you paraphrase. So this is an example. So indigenous means originating or occurring naturally in a particular place, or native. Garbage, that's literally the dictionary. When I'm ready to do the actual definition, I could start with that, but I don't want to use that. Paraphrasing is my words putting into my understanding. This is what it means, and especially the way it's used in the book. People that are native to a land or were there first. That's what indigenous means. Originating or occurring naturally in a particular place, or native. That could mean anything. Flower, it could be dirt, it could be anything. But in the way that I'm using it, in the way that I'm going to help remember it, how it applies to this book that we're going to read, is that people that are native to a land or were there first. That's good for me to understand what indigenous means. I'm paraphrasing. Another one is jubilant. The dictionary says feeling or expressing great happiness and triumph. That's so dictionary-like. When you read it in the story and the way that it's used, I'm going to paraphrase it in my words and say it's actively celebrating, showing emotion. Yeah, right? Actively celebrating, not just in silence. Showing emotion. That helps me understand what jubilant means. It means that something's very exciting, okay? So again, that's a lot of explanation, but it's really important you put these in your own words. If you copy and paste from the dictionary, who cares? A cat can do that, right? It doesn't mean you understand the word, and we're trying to build our vocabulary. All right, that's that. Now, down here, this is another example, but as I read, if you're watching this video, what you need to do is stop the video, pause it. If you hear a quote that somehow relates to apartheid and how it affects Trevor Noah's life, that's an easy one to find because the whole 8 chapters, he's always talking about apartheid. And I'll give you an example. This is on page 12. And when you do a quote, you don't paraphrase. You paraphrase definitions because it helps you understand it. You don't paraphrase a quote because you're going to use it and it's got to be exactly word for word. So here's a quote. The triumph of democracy over apartheid is sometimes called the bloodless revolution. It is called that because very little white blood was spilled. Black blood ran in the streets. That was on page 12. And you want to put not only the word for word quote in quotations, but you also want to put that page number so you can go back to it and find it later. Okay. We're asking you to do at least one quote per chapter, but there's so many. So I actually added another one, and you can use these or you can find a third one that you would rather use. Under apartheid, the government provided no public transportation for blacks, but white people still needed us to show up to mop their floors and clean their bathrooms. So think about that one, right? If I really read that again, he's saying that they didn't get any help to get places from the government, but they still needed to go clean for the white people. So they needed to get places. So they had to find their own way. This tells you a lot about how this system is. The government wasn't set up to help people who were black. Apartheid was about separation. So that's on pages 13 to 14. That carries over to the second page. So these are what you're finding every day. 2 vocabulary words, and we won't be giving you these definitions in the future. So we'll give you the vocabulary words, and today I'm just giving you the definition. That's my paraphrase. So don't copy what I wrote. Write what you need to write. This is Jubilant. This is my definition. So put it into your own words and paraphrase what I already paraphrased from the dictionary. And then the third thing is we want you to at least find one quote and copy it word for word with a page number that somehow connects with Trevor Noah and apartheid. Okay? All right. That's the work you're doing, and I'm giving you it ahead of time. Now I'm going to read. Okay? So here we go. Born a Crime. Apartheid, the South African government policy of racial segregation, was genius at convincing people who were the overwhelming majority to turn on each other. Hate is what it was. You separate people into groups and make them hate one another so you can control them. During the years of apartheid, black South Africans outnumbered white South Africans nearly 5-1, yet we were divided into different tribes with different languages. Zulu, Xhosa, Swana, Sotho, Venda, Ndebele, Songa, Pedi, and more. I'm not sure I have those pronounced right. That was my best shot. Long before apartheid existed, these tribal factions clashed and warred with one another. Then white rule used that animosity, or hatred, to divide and conquer. All non-whites were systematically classified into various groups and subgroups. Then these groups were given differing levels of rights and privileges to keep them at odds. Perhaps the starkest of these divisions, or the most clear division, was between South Africa's 2 dominant groups, or the biggest, the Zulu and the Xhosa. The Zulu man is known as the warrior. He is proud. He puts his head down and fights. When the colonial armies invaded, the Zulu charged into battle with nothing but spears and shields against men with guns. The Zulu were slaughtered by the thousands, but they never stopped fighting. The Xhosa, on the other hand, pride themselves on being the thinkers. My mother is Xhosa. Nelson Mandela, the anti-apartheid revolutionary who was imprisoned for 27 years and who eventually became South Africa's first black president, was Xhosa. It's so hard to say. The Xhosa waged a long war against the white man as well, but after experiencing the futility of battle against a better armed foe, many Xhosa chiefs took a mere nimble approach, sort of like more sneaky. These white people are here whether we like it or not, they said. Let's see what tools they possess that can be useful to us. Instead of being resistant to English, let's learn English. We'll understand that the white man is sane and we can force him to negotiate with us. The Zulu went to war with the white man. The Xhosa played chess with the white man. For a long time, neither was particularly successful, and each blamed the other for a problem neither had created. Bitterness festered, or kind of happened, sort of boiled under the surface. For decades, those feelings were held in check by a common enemy. Then apartheid fell. Mandela walked free, and Black South Africa went to war with itself. Chapter 1, Run. I was 9 years old when my mother threw me out of a moving car. It happened on a Sunday. I know it was on a Sunday because we were coming home from church, and every Sunday in my childhood meant church. We never missed church. My mother was, and still is, a deeply religious woman, very Christian. Like indigenous peoples around the world, Black South Africans adopted the religion of our colonizers. By adopt, I mean it was forced on us. My childhood involved church or some form of church at least 4 nights a week. Tuesday night was the prayer meeting. Wednesday night was Bible study. Thursday night was youth church. Friday and Saturday we had off. Then on Sunday we went to church. 3 churches to be precise. The reason we went to 3 churches was because my mom said each church gave her something different. The first church offered jubilant praise of the Lord. The second church offered deep analysis of the scripture, which my mom loved. The third church offered passion and catharsis. It was a place where you truly felt the presence of the Holy Spirit inside you. Completely by coincidence, as we moved back and forth between these churches, I noticed that each one had its own distinct racial makeup. Jubilant church was mixed church. Analytical church was white church. And passionate, cathartic church, that was black church. So when he mixed, means white and blacks. Mixed church was Rhema Bible Church. Rhema was one of those huge, super modern, suburban mega churches. The pastor, Ray McCauley, was an ex-bodybuilder with a big smile and the personality of a cheerleader. Pastor Ray had competed in the 1974 Mr. Universe competition. He placed 3rd. The winner that year was Arnold Schwarzenegger. Every week, Ray would be up on stage working really hard to make Jesus cool. There was arena-style seating in a rock band jamming with the latest Christian contemporary pop. Everyone sang along, and if you didn't know the words, that was okay because they were all right up there on the Jumbotron for you. Jumbotron is a huge screen. It was Christian karaoke. Basically, I always had a blast at mixed church. White church was Rosebank Union in Sandon, a very white and wealthy part of Johannesburg. I loved white church because I didn't actually have to go to the main service. My mom would go to that, and I would go to the youth side to Sunday school. In Sunday school, we got to read cool stories. Noah and the flood was obviously a favorite. I had a personal stake there. But I also loved the stories about Moses parting the Red Sea, David slaying Goliath, Jesus whipping the money changers in the temple. I grew up in a home with very little exposure to popular culture. My mom didn't want my mind polluted by sex and violence. The only music I really knew was from church, soaring, uplifting songs praising Jesus. It was the same with movies. The Bible was my action movie. Samson was my superhero. He was my He-Man. A guy beating 1,000 people to death with the jawbone of a donkey? That's pretty fierce. Eventually you get to Paul writing letters to the Ephesians, and it loses the plot, but the Old Testament and the Gospels, I could quote you anything from those pages, chapter and verse. There were Bible games and quizzes every week at White Church, and I always trounced everyone. Trounced means like whooped them. Then there was Black Church. There was always some kind of Black church service going on somewhere, and we tried them all. In the township, that was typically meant in an outdoor tent revival style church. We usually went to my grandmother's church, an old school Methodist congregation, 500 African grannies in blue and white blouses, clutching their Bibles and patiently burning in the hot African sun. Black church was rough. No air conditioning, no lyrics up on the Jumbotrons, and it lasted forever, 3 or 4 hours at least, which confused me because white church was only like an hour. In and out, thanks for coming. But at Black church, I would sit there for what felt like an eternity, trying to figure out why time moves so slowly. I eventually decided Black people needed more time with Jesus because we suffered more. Black church had one saving grace. If I could make it to the 3rd or 4th hour, I'd get to watch the pastor cast demons out of people. People possessed by demons would start running up and down the aisles like madmen, screaming in tongues. That means like sort of a foreign language that no one knows. The ushers would tackle them like bouncers at a club and hold them down. The pastors would grab their heads and violently shake them back and forth, shouting, "I cast this spirit in the name of Jesus." Some pastors were more violent than others, but what they all had in common was that they wouldn't stop until the demon was gone and the congregant had gone limp and collapsed on the stage. The person had to fall. Because if he didn't fall, that meant the demon was powerful and the pastor needed to come at him even harder. You could be a linebacker in the NFL. Didn't matter. That pastor was taking you down. Good Lord, that was fun. Christian karaoke, fierce action stories, and violent faith healers. Man, I loved church. The thing I didn't love was the lengths we had to go to in order to get to church. It was an epic slog, like a real chore. We lived in Eden Park, a tiny suburb way outside Johannesburg. It took us an hour to get to White Church, another 45 minutes to get to Mixed Church, and another 45 minutes to drive out to Soweto for Black Church. Then, if that wasn't bad enough, some Sundays we drive back to the White Church for a special evening service. By the time we finally got home at night, I'd collapse into bed. This particular Sunday, the Sunday I was hurled from a moving car, started out like any other Sunday. My mother woke me up, made me porridge for breakfast. That's like oatmeal or, cream of wheat. I took my bath while she dressed my baby brother, Andrew, who was 9 months old. Then we went out to the driveway. But once we were all strapped in and ready to go, the car wouldn't start. My mom had this ancient, broken down, bright tangerine Volkswagen Beetle that she picked up for next to nothing, and it was always breaking down. To this day, I hate secondhand cars. That means like cars you get from someone else. I'll take a new car with the warranty every time. As much as I love church, taking public transport meant the slog would be twice as long and twice as hard. When the Volkswagen refused to start, I was praying, please say we'll just stay home. Please say we'll just stay home. Then I glanced over to see the determined look on my mother's face, her jaw set, and I knew I had a long day ahead of me. Come, she said, we're going to catch minibuses. My mother is as stubborn as she is religious. Once her mind's made up, that's it. It's the devil, she said about the stalled car. The devil doesn't want us to go to church. That's why we've got to catch minibuses. Whenever I found myself up against my mother's faith-based obstinacy, or like her resistance, obstinacy is to be like, I'm not doing that, or that like, I disagree with that, or I'm being stubborn, I would try as respectfully as possible to counter with an opposing point of view. Or I said, the Lord knows that today we shouldn't go to church, which is why he made sure the car wouldn't start, so that we stay at home as a family and take a day of rest, because even the Lord rested. That's the devil talking, Trevor. No, because Jesus is in control. And if Jesus is in control and we pray to Jesus, he wouldn't let the car start, but he hasn't. Therefore, no, Trevor. Sometimes Jesus puts obstacles in your way to see if you overcome them, like Job. This could be a test. Yes, Mom, but the test could be to see if we're willing to accept what has happened and stay at home and praise Jesus for his wisdom. No, that's the devil talking. But, Mom, Trevor, Sunkela. Sunkela is a phrase with many shades of meaning. It says, don't undermine me, don't underestimate me, and just try me. It's a command and a threat all at once. It's a common thing for Sosa parents to say their kids. Anytime I heard it, I knew it meant the conversation was over. And if I uttered another word, I was in for hiding. At the time, I attended a white Catholic school called Maryvale College. I was the champion of the Maryvale Sports Day every single year. And my mother won the mom's trophy every single year. Why? Because she was always chasing me to give me a hiding. And I was always running not to get the hiding. Nobody ran like me and my mom. When he means hiding, like, this is your hide, right? And when you like slap it, you're hitting your hide. So I think that means kind of a beating. We had a very Tom and Jerry relationship. Remember the mouse and the cat? She was the strict disciplinarian. I was incorrigibly naughty. She would send me out to buy groceries, and I wouldn't come right home because I'd be using the change from the milk and the bread to play arcade games at the supermarket. I loved video games. I was a master at Street Fighter. I could go on forever at a single play. I'd drop a coin in, time would fly, and the next thing I knew, there'd be a woman behind me with a belt. It was a race. I'd take off out the door and through the dusty streets of Eden Park, clambering over walls, ducking through backyards. It was a normal thing in our neighborhood. Everybody knew that Trevor child would come charging through and his mom would be right there behind him. She could go at a full sprint in high heels, but if she really wanted to come after me, she'd do this weird move with her ankles and the heels would go flying and she wouldn't even miss a step. That's when I knew, okay, she's in turbo mode now. Heels meaning her shoes. When I was little, she always caught me, but as I got older, I got faster, and when speed failed her, she'd use her wits. If I was about to get away, she'd yell, "Stop, thief!" knowing it would bring the whole neighborhood out against me. Then I'd have strangers trying to grab and tackle me, and I'd have to duck and dive and dodge them as well, all the while screaming, "I'm not a thief, I'm her son." The last thing I wanted to do that Sunday morning was climb into some crowded minibus, but the second I heard my mom say, "Gela," I knew my fate was sealed. She gathered up Andrew, and we climbed out of the Volkswagen and went out to catch a ride. I was 5 years old, nearly 6, when Nelson Mandela was released from prison. I remember seeing it on TV and everyone being happy. By the way, you'll learn about Nelson Mandela a little bit when you're at home. Actually, you're at home. So if this is Monday, this is Tuesday's work. If this is Tuesday, this is Monday's work. I didn't know why we were happy, just that we were. I was aware of the fact that there was a thing called apartheid and it was ending, and that was a big deal. But I didn't understand the intricacies of it or the details. What I do remember, what I will never forget, is the violence that followed. The triumph of democracy over apartheid is sometimes called the bloodless revolution. It is called that because very little white blood was spilled. Black blood ran in the streets. If you remember, that's the quote I used. That tells me about apartheid. That's a pretty strong statement. As the apartheid regime fell, we knew that the black man was now going to rule. The question was, which black man? Spates of violence, or little pockets of it, broke out between the Inkatha Freedom Party and the ANC, the African National Congress, as they jockeyed for power. The political dynamic between these two groups was very complicated, but the simplest way to understand it was a proxy war between the Zulu and the Xhosa. The Inkatha was predominantly Zulu, very militant and very nationalistic, or they believed in the cause. The ANC, or African National Congress, encompassed many different tribes, but its leaders at the time were primarily Xhosa. Instead of uniting for peace, they turned on one another, committing acts of unbelievable savagery. Massive riots broke out. In the evenings, my mom and I would turn our little black and white TV and watch the news. 12 people killed, 50 people killed, 100 people killed. Ultimately, thousands of people died. Eden Park sat not far from the sprawling townships in the East Rand, Thokoza, and Catalhong, which were the sites of some of the most horrific Inkatha ANC clashes. Once a month, at least, we'd drive home and the neighborhood would be on fire. Hundreds of rioters in the street. My mom would edge the car slowly through the crowds and around blockades made of flaming tires. Nothing burns like a tire. It rages with a fury you can't imagine. Whenever the riots broke out, all our neighbors would wisely hole up behind closed doors, but not my mom. She'd head straight out, and as we inch our way past the blockade, she'd give us the rioters this look. Let me pass. I'm not involved in this chaos. She was unwavering, or she never buckled in the face of danger. That always amazed me. It didn't matter that there was a war on our doorstep. She had things to do, places to be. It was the same stubbornness that kept her going to church despite a broken down car. That carless Sunday, we made our circuit of churches, ending up at White Church. When we walked out of Rosebank Union, it was dark and we were alone. It had been an endless day of minibuses, and I was exhausted. It was 9 o'clock at least. In those days, with all the violence and riots going on, you did not want to be out late that night. You did not want to be out that late at night. We were standing at the corner of Jellicoe Avenue and Oxford Road, right in the heart of Johannesburg's wealthy white suburbia, and there were no minibuses. The streets were empty. I so badly wanted to turn to my mom and say, "You see, this is why God wanted us to stay home." But one look at the expression on her face, and I knew better than to speak. We waited and waited for a minibus to come. Under apartheid, the government provided no public transportation for blacks, but white people still needed us to show up to mop their floors and clean their bathrooms. So there we go. There's another quote I used. Necessity being the mother of invention, basically mean like when you need something, that's when you invent stuff. Black people created their own transit system, an informal network of bus routes controlled by private associations operating entirely outside the law. Different groups ran different routes, and they would fight over who controlled what. There was bribery, that means giving people money for doing things, and general shadiness that went on. A great deal of violence and a lot of protection money paid to avoid violence. The one thing you didn't do was steal a route from a rival group. Drivers who stole routes would get killed. Being unregulated or not controlled by any governing body, minibuses were also very unreliable. When they came, they came. When they didn't, they didn't. Standing outside Rosebank Union, I was literally falling asleep on my feet. Not a minibus in sight. Eventually, my mother said, "Let's hitchhike." We walked and walked, and after what felt like an eternity, a car drove up and stopped. The driver offered us a ride, and we climbed in. We hadn't gone 10 feet when suddenly a minibus swerved right in front of the car and cut us off. A Zulu driver got out with an an Iwisa, a large traditional Zulu weapon, a war club, basically. It's used to smash people's skulls in. Another guy, his crony, or his thug henchman, got out of the passenger side. They walked up to the driver's side of the car we were in, grabbed the man who'd offered us a ride, pulled him out, and started shoving their clubs in his face. Why are you stealing our customers? Why are you picking people up? It looked like they were going to kill this guy. I knew that happens sometimes. My mom spoke up. Hey, listen, he was just helping me. Leave him. We'll ride with you. That's what we wanted in the first place. So we got out of the first car and climbed into the minibus. We were the only passengers in the minibus. In addition to being violent gangsters, South African minibus drivers are notorious for complaining and haranguing or bothering or annoying passengers as they drive. This driver was a particularly angry one. As we rode along, he started lecturing my mother about being in a car with a man who was not her husband. My mother didn't suffer lectures from strange men. She told him to mind his own business, and when he heard her speaking in Xhosa, that really set him off. The stereotypes of Zulu and Xhosa women were as ingrained as those of the men. Zulu women were well-behaved and dutiful. Xhosa women were immoral and unfaithful. And here was my mother, his tribal enemy, a Xhosa woman with two small children, one of them a mixed child, no less. Oh, you're a Xhosa, he said. That explains it. Disgusting woman. Tonight you're going to learn your lesson. He sped off. He was driving fast, and he wasn't stopping, only slowing down to check for traffic at the intersections before speeding through. Death was never far away from anybody back then. My mother could be harmed. We could be killed. These were all viable or possible outcomes. But I didn't fully comprehend the danger we were in. I was so tired that I just wanted to sleep. Plus, my mom stayed very calm. She didn't panic, so I didn't know to panic. She just kept trying to reason with him. I'm sorry if we've upset you, Booty. You can just let us out here. No. Really, it's fine. We can just walk. No. He raced along Oxford Road, the lanes empty, no other cars out. I was sitting closest to the minibus's sliding door, my mother next to me, holding baby Andrew. She looked out the window at the passing road and then leaned over to me and whispered, Trevor, when he slows down at the next intersection, I'm going to open the door and we're going to jump. I didn't hear a word of what he was saying because by that point I'd completely nodded off. When we came to the next traffic light, the driver eased off the gas to look around and check the road. My mother reached over, pulled the sliding door open, grabbed me, and threw me out as fast as she could. Then she took Andrew and leaped out behind me. It felt like a dream until the pain hit. Bam! I smacked hard on the pavement. My mother landed right beside me, and we tumbled and tumbled and rolled and rolled. I was wide awake now. Eventually, I came to a stop and pulled myself up, completely disoriented. I looked around and saw my mother already on her feet. She turned and looked at me and screamed, "Run!" So I ran, and she ran, and nobody ran like me and my mom. It's weird to explain, but I just knew what to do. It was animal instinct. In a world where violence was always lurking and waiting to erupt, in the townships, when the people came swooping in with their riot gear, armored cars, and helicopters, I knew, run for cover, run and hide. I knew that as a 5-year-old. So like the gazelle runs from the lion, I ran. The men stopped the minibus and got out and tried to chase us, but they didn't stand a chance. We smoked them. I think they were in shock. I still remember glancing back and seeing them give up with a look of utter bewilderment on their faces. They didn't know they were dealing with the reigning champs of the Maryvale College Sports Day. We kept going until we made it to a 24-hour petrol station, that's a gas station, and called the police. By then, the men were long gone. I still didn't know why any of this had happened. I'd been running on pure adrenaline. Once we stopped, I realized how much pain I was in. I looked down and the skin on my arms was scraped and torn. I was cut up and bleeding all over. Mom was too. My baby brother was fine, though, incredibly. My mom had wrapped herself around him and he'd come through without a scratch. I turned to her in shock. What was that? Why are we running? What do you mean, why are we running? Those men were trying to kill us. You never told me that. You just threw me out the car. I did tell you. Why didn't you jump? Jump? I was asleep. So I should have left you there for them to kill you? At least they would have woken me up before they killed me. Back and forth we went. I was too confused and too angry about getting thrown out of the car to realize what had happened. My mother had saved my life. As we caught our breath and waited for the police to come and drive us home, she said, Well, at least we're safe. Thank God. I wasn't going to keep quiet this time. Look, Mom, I said, I know you love Jesus, but maybe next week you could ask him to meet us at our house because this really wasn't a fun night. She broke out in a huge smile and started laughing. I started laughing too, and we just stood there, this little boy and his mom, our arms and legs covered in blood and dirt, laughing together in the light of a petrol gas station on the side of the road in the middle of the night. There we go. All right. So again, this by now you should have all our notes. They should be done. And there's chapter 1. All right.